Greetings, cinephiles. Are you looking for a movie analysis podcast that stands above the rest? Then look no further than Collateral Cinema, the only movie podcast that matters.
We analyze good movies, we analyze bad movies, and yes, we also analyze the in-betweens of the world of cinema.
So if you like what you hear, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
And yes, my friends, we are 420 friendly. So when you listen to us, smoke it if you've got it. And now, here's a new episode of Collateral Gaming. The show starts right now.
I'm Ashley Chancellor.
I'm Michael Toscano.
And this is Collateral Gaming. Welcome to Collateral Gaming, the only video game podcast that matters, where we focus on good games, bad games, and everything else in between in the world of gaming. We are podcasting straight from somewhere in Texas, and yes, my friends, we are a 420-friendly podcast, so whatever you have, be it bongs, blunts, or joints, smoke it if you've got it. Welcoming for the first time, my personal friend, Mr. Michael Toscano. How's it going, man?
It's going good, man. Glad to be here. Thanks for finally having me on.
Yeah, man. You mentioned some time ago that whenever the Elden Ring DLC came out, you were down to do it. So as soon as I heard about it, I thought about you, and I was like, yeah, let's do this.
Although that was a couple of years ago, I was not anticipating it to be that long to launch, but here we are, right?
I know. My buddy Zach and co-host Zach, as many of y'all will know, he was going to be on this episode because he himself has actually only recently gotten through Elden Ring and really got into an Elden Ring kick. So I was excited to have him on, but scheduling conflicts. So unfortunately, Zach, if you're listening though, I love you, man, and hope you enjoy this episode. But anyway, we are going to be talking about, for the first time on the podcast, a DLC. In the past, I'd wanted to kind of cover upcoming a DLC, but we just never really got around to it. But like you said, Michael, I mean, as soon as you told me that you were interested in this, I was like, yeah, I'd definitely love to actually revisit Elden Ring because I barely played the game when it came out, actually.
And if any DLC was going to be the first one that you were going to go over on this podcast, this should be the one. You know, this DLC was massive. It's almost the whole game in itself.
Oh, yeah. In a lot of ways, I think it seems just kind of like a scaled-down version of the original game. Like,
right.
And they did it in 2 years. So actually, if you think about it, that's pretty impressive. I mean, obviously, they've got a lot of assets to reuse from the base game. But even so, I mean, they've added, I think, like 8 new weapon types and a whole new subsystem for scaling with your character in the Shadow realm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they found this nice balance between making it feel fresh and like you're playing a new experience while still keeping the base game's identity intact. And I thought that was a pretty good balance they had. While keeping your same level, you still need to have the new leveling system to make it through a lot of portions of the game correctly, unless you want to get hammered on by a lot of these early game bosses.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, by the way, for this episode, as we cover the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion, we may or may not have spoilers for the game. The DLC's been out for a month now, so we're not going to shy away from spoilers. That being said, I've barely gotten to play Shadow of the Erdtree myself, so I won't have a lot of spoilers to provide, but
hey, whatever comes out, if it comes out, it does, because this game, there's just so many cool bosses, so many new bosses. We didn't get a lot of reskins for the main bosses, if any, and so it's going to be something that we're going to want to talk about. There's a lot of uniqueness here, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of differences from the main game as far as boss design, as far as level design, and the dungeons themselves. And so there may be some spoilers that come out when it relates to that, but we'll try to keep it, as clean as possible that way.
Exactly. And like I said, I mean, it's been out for a month now. I know myself, I'm not too worried about staying away from that. I mean, I'm just trying to play the game and figure out, have kind of a general direction where to go. But I guess we'll start off with our feelings on the base game, on Elden Ring as a whole, because it's been a while since we covered it 2 years ago, and I didn't really play the whole game a whole lot, since then. I've actually now played quite a bit. But Michael, go ahead and tell me your experience with Elden Ring.
Yeah, so the Elden Ring is actually my first Souls-like game. I didn't play a lot of or really any of the Dark Souls, and I played Demon Souls way back when, but didn't really get too far into it. And so Elden Ring was my first experience fully deep diving into a Souls-like. And so as you can expect, I went in there, and within the first 5 seconds, I'm getting my ass kicked. And so, Tree Sentinel right when you come out of the gate. And so really, my first experience was, there's no way I'm beating this game. And so I started just running past everything, hopped on my horse, and I ended up in levels where, I was severely underleveled, and I couldn't even take on even a regular trash mob in the area. And so it really was a learning curve to get into this type of game and to have a good experience with it. But ultimately I did, and I'm glad I stuck with it because the world design and the enemies and the amount of fun that you can have with the different types of builds, it's insane. And my impression of the base game was it's absolutely deserving of the Game of the Year that it received because, I can't think of a better game that came out at the moment.
Yeah, my experience with Souls games is very similar to yours. I've played a little bit of Dark Souls 1. I think I got to the first level, and I've tried out Demon Souls and shit. But yeah, other than that, I mean, this was the first time I've actually spent quite a bit of time in a Souls game. So and this one is open world, so like you said, there's a lot of opportunity for you to just go wander somewhere you're really not supposed to be. And so it kind of just reinforces the idea of get good. You're in the starting area and you're getting your ass kicked. You try to get away and you get your ass kicked even harder. So it's okay, we got to find something. Like I said, I actually finally got the chance to play through quite a bit of the game. I mean, I was on a fast track. I used a guide online to figure out how to defeat the 2 optional bosses that are required to access the DLC, Radon and Moog. So you can get to those relatively quickly without much effort, but there's also the case of needing to make sure that your character is prepared to fight these bosses.
Yeah, I mean, both of them can be ran to pretty quickly early on in the game. For Radon, you just have to make sure you touch a grace, and then you can access that fight. And then for Moog, there's a quest line that you can use to get early access there. But like you said, if you're not ready for those fights, what's the point of even getting there? And so you got to make sure that you can handle that to be able to get ready to the DLC. And I think it's a good skill check. To be honest, I think they're great bosses to pick to be able to enter the DLC because they're bosses that are really going to have you get good before you go into the much harder aspect of the DLC versus the base game.
Definitely. And in a somewhat controversial movie, but nothing I wouldn't have expected from FromSoft, we actually have the DLC locked behind a wall of get good, which is unusual. Usually with the DLC, developers are very adamant about giving you access to everything that you paid for, since you did pay for it. I guess is kind of their thought there. If you get DLC for a fighting game, they're going to give you all the characters with all the costumes unlocked right away. But FromSoft said, no, fuck you. We want to make sure that the players are good enough. And honestly, I respect the hell out of that because they wanted to make something that would actually challenge people that had played the original game. After all, it's been 2 years.
Right. And that is a good thing to do, like you said, but it also makes you wonder how it affects the replayability of the DLC itself when after you beat the DLC, you have to restart the base game to get access back to it. So then there raises that question as well is, how many people are actually going through the base game over and over to gain access to the DLC every single time?
Right, and I mean with Elden Ring, you can do New Game Plus several times over. So you'll be coming into the DLC presumably, with some overpowered build in some cases, where you've really had time to just. I don't know how many people actually max everything out, but I imagine a few did. And we've still got to find a way to humble those players. So shout out to FromSoft for managing to do that. As we touched upon earlier, there's a whole new secondary leveling system. Sort of finding some of the things in the base game, like the seeds and the tiers and whatnot. They've got what is it now? What was it called? The new...
Sacred Tears? Oh, the Scadutree fragments.
Yeah, Scadutree fragments and the something to do with the ashes.
The revered spirit ashes for your summons, absolutely.
Revered spirit ashes. There you go. Yeah.
And it's funny that you said that because that was one of my concerns. You know, like you said, the Elden Ring was out for 2 years before the DLC came out, right? The base game. And so in those 2 years, people like myself who played a lot of hours into that game, I could steamroll any of the boss in the base game like nothing. It's a cakewalk at this point. And so my worry going into the DLC was that it wasn't going to be fun because it was going to be too easy. And so when I go into the base game having none of the new leveling system intact yet, or I'm sorry, when I go into the DLC having none of the new leveling system intact, and I go up into the first mausoleum, which is a Black Gel Knight, and I just get my ass handed to me, left and right, up and down. I don't even stand a chance. I can't even get a hit on this guy. And instantly, it's the opposite of what you would expect, but that was fun for me. I had a lot of fun having to get good again after thinking that I was going to be too overpowered for that DLC.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience because I leveled myself pretty much just necessary to beat Moog. Actually, you helped me out with that. You gave me a bunch of runes, enough to get myself up to
right.
150. But as you told me, that only gets you so far. Like, sure, I raised the hell out of my int stat because I'm going for an int build. But, you know, I've still got to actually have, like, sorceries and weapons. I've got to upgrade everything else to... And it. So I think I spent the majority of the playthrough of the base game this time actually just kind of... getting all the other aspects of the character up to speed with my level. I mean, so yeah, you saved me some time grinding, but you know, I still had to explore the world and find things in order to get good at the game and find things that worked. But it is very satisfying when, you know, you're several levels over somewhere where you're supposed to be and you've got appropriate equipment. And so, you know, you can just spawn a Comet Azure, like a Kamehameha, and just like one-shot some of these bosses.
Yeah, you can definitely do that with Moog as well. You know, get you right into the DLC with Comet Azure. Int builds are a little overpowered at the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm running an int build right now in the DLC, and I could tell you it's been an absolute blast running an int build because, you know, you have so many different options as an int build, especially if you run like an int dex, then you have melee options as well. And it's in my opinion, my favorite way of running through the DLC so far.
I'm kind of doing an int. Well, I'd mainly focused on the int build, but now I'm kind of building towards an int dex because I started out with the samurai character because I just wanted to because it was cool as hell.
So dex is already in your blood.
Right. So I've already got a pretty high dex stat as it is, and dex was kind of one of my secondary stats that I was leveling up. But I was really putting most of my runes into int and mind. But I respect for the DLC. I got a larval tier, and I respect. Threw away some of the mind points that I realized I didn't need it because I'd already hit the soft cap. And I'm starting to build now towards that because, you know, like I've got the Moonveil Blade, and I've actually got a couple of talismans now that'll help me so that I can pull off the skills with the Moonveil Blade and actually recover FP while I'm doing it.
There you go. So then you could take some points out of mind and put some into dex, get you some nice melee damage as well.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. So I've been putting mostly into mind, and then dex as the next one, and then vigor and endurance where I kind of need to.
Yeah, you definitely gonna need the vigor in the DLC.
But I haven't touched, you know, the strength or faith or arcane. I figure once I hit the soft caps for some of the other stats, I might actually put some money into those. But.
And that's the best part about these types of games is you can go and you could test everything out. Where you just take a larval tier, respec your build, and now you can run all these other stats that you never dabbled in before. And now you can fuck around with that and see how fun those are. Maybe you find a new weapon out on the land. You don't have the stats for it. Go respec, try it out, see what you like. And that's the best part about these games.
Yeah, I really do like that aspect, and it's really cool. And I mean, I know that the larval tiers are kind of a precious commodity, but Shadow the Erdtree has given you new ones because they've added a lot of new weapons and things to the game. So you're going to want to try out different builds and try out different things. And I'm kind of excited to see like where we can go with that. And where I was consulting a guide for the main game in order to get to the DLC as quickly as possible, I'm sort of approaching the DLC with more of a kind of a free roaming exploration in mind, you know? Kind of just letting myself wander more and just find things, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what you should be doing in an open world type of game. Now, that is something I do want to talk about with Shadow of the Erdtree that was a bit different from the base game is that world exploration. In the base game, you can go off the path, into the trees, into the woods, lake, whatever, and you're going to find items everywhere, under a tree, under a rock, inside a cave. You're going to find some smithing stones, maybe some crafting materials, at least something to reward you for going off that path and exploring. And while Shadow of the Erdtree has some beautiful scenery throughout the game, the landscape is a lot more empty than the base game is. You don't really see anything off the main paths as far as items and discovery. It doesn't really reward you for exploration the same way that the base game did.
And I'm only in kind of like the starting areas, but I kind of noticed that as well as I went like the field just kind of seemed a little bit empty, but I thought maybe I just hadn't really looked at the nooks and crannies yet. I will say I got my ass handed to me by some regular mobs.
The grave birds are out there too, yeah.
And I came across this giant walking fire monster thing, and I was like, oh, fuck. I stood no chance.
Yeah, you'll find out later on how you can actually pretty easily beat those enemies. There's a couple of different types of them, but there's something you're going to want to come back to. It's like Tree Sentinel from the base game. You're not coming out of the gate and beating that thing, You're coming back to that later, but they're fun. They're definitely a lot of fun to beat later on. You get some great rewards from them.
Yeah, and getting the revenge against the Tree Sentinel. That is so satisfying.
Would you believe me if I told you you're going to see Tree Sentinel again later in the DLC?
Oh, no. I encountered a draconic Tree Sentinel in the base game, but and he actually, I didn't have a whole lot of difficulty with him by the time I got to him. But
yeah, they hit like a truck, but they're pretty easy to dodge.
Yeah. That's the thing is like once you learn the patterns, it kind of becomes, it just becomes a thing. And like with this type of Souls gameplay, what you do is there's just kind of a loop. Not a lot of games implement checkpoints the way that Souls games do. Modern game design has actually kind of almost eliminated the checkpoint system as we know it before. With checkpoints just being so frequent and the game just auto-saving all the time. But with the Souls formula, it's kind of sticking to a tradition of gaming that would be thought to be obsolete by modern standards, except that, we have games like Elden Ring still using it.
Yeah, and then we have, these sites of grace that we can fast travel to, we can rest at, get our gear redone, Ashes of War, and they're useful checkpoints. It's not just like an autosave. It's something that you're seeing use out of regularly throughout the game, and it's something that I wish more games would come back to, that type of not just having to go through a menu for everything, but actually integrating it into the game. And so instead of having to just pause the game and then go, switch my weapons or anything like that, that's integrated into the game's checkpoints. And I like that. That's something we don't really see a lot of anymore.
Yeah, and you can't technically pause the game. I mean, you can. You have to go through a couple menus, but like while you're checking your map or like, selecting items, like the game is not paused.
The amount of times I've died going to get another beer, let me tell you. I'll think I'm by myself. All right, there's no enemies around me. I'm good. And then I'll walk away for a bit, and I come back, and there's a mob that was walking down the pathway, happened to walk right by me and slaughter me while I was gone.
No.
It's just like, oh, man. Now I got to run back and get my souls.
Now that's kind of what I was getting at is there's this whole gameplay loop. And I'll be honest, the reason it took me as long as it did since the game has come out, because I finally beat Moog last night, let me tell you. Like, I've spent the past month just focusing on that. But I get frustrated sometimes, and I'm just done. Like the gameplay loop just frustrated me. Like I'm tired of dying over and over and over again because you get a little bit further each time just for something to just come out of nowhere and kill you again. And the messages are helpful when they appear or when you read them, but like you're just gonna consistently be humbled. It's kind of a trial and error thing. So there's just this trial and error system with the gameplay loop, and I'm kind of excited to see where Shadow of the Erdtree takes that because I mean I've heard the bosses are significantly more difficult in this one.
They are, in the base game, a lot of the bosses were difficult in their own right because they had something that was unique about them that you had to learn. Like Millennia, she regains health when she hits you. She has like a waterfowl dance technique. Fire Giant is able to roll around the map and smash you. There's a lot of different things that the bosses had where, hey, I need to learn how to counter that or how to be better at that, and then I'll be able to win the fight. But with the DLC, there's just a lot of, what I feel is artificial difficulty with these bosses in that they kind of just have an endless loop of attacks. They they just don't stop. Like there's no openings. You kind of have to forge an opening, either by retaliations with a shield, like running around cheesing, throwing in a summon in there for a tank, and you got to kind of make your own openings because these bosses are not going to give them to you. And with that being said, they are a lot more difficult than the base game. Even just the mini bosses or the field bosses, they will humble you very quickly compared to the regular Elden Ring bosses.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, I bet even more so as they get into, more of the Shadow of the Erdtree. But yeah, no, it is just, it can be so frustrating sometimes, just waiting for an opening to attack a boss. Like, and you got to learn, like I said, that feeds into the gameplay loop again. When you're tackling a difficult boss, you're going to learn how they move and how to dodge every single one of their attacks to the point that it just becomes like a pattern, and you're giving yourself the same buffs before the fights, and you just kind of you just do this loop again and again and again and again. But to hear that some of the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree don't even actually give you a proper opening, oh man, I'm shuddering thinking about it. That's
There's this boss too, and it's pretty far into the game. It's more of a late game boss, but there's a boss called Romina who actually has a tail on every single direction of her body, and so you can't even come up behind her because she could be fighting your summons, and you try to come up behind her and you just get attacked anyway because she has like a 360 field of view and like 4 different heads coming off her that'll all attack you. And that's just one boss, but there's just like so many things that are like artificially difficult about these bosses that are in some ways kind of unfair, but you eventually get good at it. You find out ways to counter it, and then you beat the bosses. Maybe some people don't, right? But you try, right? You try your hardest, and that makes it fun when you finally get that victorious. But it's just these bosses are insane, and they're just like, I don't even know how to describe it, but you need those leveling systems, the Shadow Tree fragments and the Revered Spirit Ashes. You need those because no matter how good you were at the base game, you could have been like a top player. You're not coming into the DLC without those and beating any of these bosses because you're just simply not going to do enough damage. Over time, you're just going to lose.
Yeah. Take Let Me Solo Her. I think who recently renamed to Let Me Solo Them, if I'm not mistaken. I think I only heard about it maybe like a week ago that Let Me Solo Her had returned and had learned the strategies for fighting the final boss of the DLC.
Yeah, he even put on his X account that he was getting his ass handed to him over and over. He couldn't even beat the game, let alone help other people solo it. And so and you shared this on your group, on your podcast on Facebook, and his article and the video of him actually getting it down. And what's more impressive, I think, about that is not only did he solo the boss, or the bosses, I should say, not only did he solo it, but he did it without even taking a hit. And so that is the epitome of learning the patterns and getting good. Is not only did I beat them, but I beat them and they couldn't even touch me. And that is just, the fact that people are that good at the game, they need to go touch grass. That's one thing. But, hey, that's insane talent. And it just shows that if they can do it, anyone can do it with enough practice.
No fucking kidding. Like that is the thing with Elden Ring. I think that's what attracts so many people. It's just the idea of just getting good at this game. Like just really investing so much time into this that like not only have I beat the story multiple times over, but like I know this game like the back of my hand. I can dodge everything. I can do this, without ever leveling up or like it's just spawned like so many different challenges. I mean, I bet the speedrunning community for this is just absolutely off the walls.
Yeah, there is, and they do their own thing, right? With the speed runs, they have they know exactly where to go to get the right weapons, buffs, upgrades, the fastest way you can do it, and then get into that end game and win. And so they have their own challenges. Then you also have challenges like level 1 runs, no weapon upgrade runs. I mean, the amount of things that you can do to challenge yourself and make the game more difficult is crazy. And it just makes you wonder what's wrong with these people that they want this to be more difficult. I'm having a hard time myself. And, just playing the game the way it's meant to be played, and you got people that want it to be more difficult, that's on them, but it's insane.
You gotta wonder, like, homie, what's going on at home? Like what is on your mind, man?
Yeah,
but
it's crazy.
Yeah, and with Shadow of the Erdtree, I think right now we're kind of still in the early stages where people are still like finding this really difficult. But give it a few months, or look at it next year or in a couple years and see where the community is now with the DLC. I'm actually kind of excited to see, like where people take this, because I've seen some fucking complaints. I mean, people that love the base game I've seen a few people just completely shit on this because of I think of some of the things like you're talking about, like artificial difficulty, just some of the stuff just being bullshit to try to introduce challenge back to players. But at the end of the day, I think it's a thing that the community will overcome.
And it is something they will overcome, and it just like the base game, it's something that you have to do with a lot of practice. And so I'm on my second playthrough of the DLC right now. I've already completely finished the first one, and I'm running it a second time, and I can say just right off the bat that already has made it way easier. It's a lot easier your second time around to go through the DLC, because not just because you already know where everything's at, you kind of know how to navigate the DLC, but you're also building up more of that internal leveling system. You're getting stronger that way, and then you have the experience of the late game bosses, and it makes the earlier DLC bosses a walk in the park for some people. At least for me it was. And so that's already just second playthrough already making this a little bit easier. And so for the people that we got like people like Let Me Solo Them, and they're getting the boss to 1 HP and then dying on purpose. That way they can just keep replaying the fight over and over. And that's their way of getting good at that.
Yeah. That's just insane to me. Like the level, and what's crazy about this is, I haven't gotten to this level with this game yet, but I've seen a lot of people just jump into this in a matter of weeks, month or two, baby. Like I've seen people just get absolutely just like invested in it. And just like learn everything there is to do. I mean, I think I saw it with you whenever you started talking about playing this game. I saw it with Zach when he started talking about it, and I was like, shit, I really need to go back and check out Elden Ring again. Because, like the level that people get into this game and like understand the game, like it's just kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, when the base game came out, I spent, probably 500-600 hours on that game just playing it over and over. Got like NG7 on my one character, and a couple of other characters that I got pretty far into the game. And I've invested countless hours into that, and it kind of got boring. I took a break from it until the DLC came out, and so I think that helped me. When the DLC came out, I was pumped up because I haven't played the base game for a while at that point, and so I missed it, came back to it, fresh experience, and like I said earlier when we were talking about the base game, but they've done a great job of making it feel fresh while still making it feel like it's Elden Ring in its soul. It doesn't feel exactly like Elden Ring 2 or a different game, but it doesn't feel close enough like the base game to where it feels repetitive. It does feel like a fresh experience with the new weapon types, the new boss battles you have, and then the dungeons they're a lot more complex than the base game dungeons. Maybe Stormveil excluded. That one is pretty complex, but most of the dungeons in the base game are pretty linear versus in the DLC, they've changed the design of that to be more, you have a lot more pathways, a lot more forks, a lot more options to take, and more to clear. And so I feel they've done a great job of making it feel fresh while still keeping that identity. And it's enjoyable. It really is.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's what Shadow of the Erdtree's managed to do. I mean, we waited 2 years for this shit, but I think the timing is perfect. It's right off the time that people were kind of just as you mentioned earlier, just kind of, done with it. They pretty much done everything that this game had to offer. And, if you wanted to get better, you're going to have to get on like insane levels, And so, revitalizing interests like this and doing it in a way to, the same level of critical acclaim, to an even higher degree of difficulty. I mean, FromSoftware's really outdone themselves. I mean, I was impressed to see what they did with the Souls formula, applying it to the open world. And I think that makes a huge amount of difference to me. Personally, because the cool thing with Elden Ring is that, hey, if you're having too much difficulty with this one thing, you can kind of just go somewhere else and do something else. That's how open the game is. And, and in a sense, you'll be leveling up your character and grinding, so it's going to be worthwhile. What I'm interested to find out is how much the open world structure applies to Shadow of the Erdtree.
Yeah, and like I said, the exploration in Shadow of the Erdtree, it's not quite the same as the base game. You're not going to get rewarded for going off the path and looking in every nook and cranny trying to find some hidden item. There are a few in there, and there are some laying around, but for the most part, I've gone into some areas, especially, and you'll see later when you get there, the Frenzy Flame area, the Abyssal Woods, I believe it's called. You could spend 45 minutes to an hour running around the area and find one item. Looking behind every single nook and cranny, you're going to find one item in the entire area, and maybe just like 2 or 3 enemies, and then there's some that'll creep up on you, but you'll see that later. But it's the formula of you could find 100 items just off the path. It's not really applied in Shadow of the Erdtree. But at first, I thought that was a problem. To me, it felt like it was, less rewarding. But as I progressed through the game and saw just how many different areas there were, I found it to be a little bit better. I kind of enjoyed it after a while because you're able to focus on fighting the enemies and getting through the quest lines a lot better than spending 30, 45 minutes, an hour just finding smithing stones in the grass. And so I can kind of see why they did that, because the DLC, it is very, very packed as far as the areas go, with different types of bosses, quest lines, and NPC characters. A lot more packed than the base game was. You have most of your characters in the base game in Round Table Hold. You don't really come across a lot of NPCs out in the open area the way you do in Shadow of the Erdtree. Shadow of the Erdtree, they're everywhere. You got NPCs in every single area that you could find, talk to, have quest interactions with, and complete their quest lines in the open world. And so I can see why they kind of navigated away from that exploration aspect, because there's a lot more to focus on in the open world itself, which I found to be a lot better of a way to apply that in Shadow of the Erdtree.
Yeah, but what I'm curious about is I know that there aren't as many collectibles and things to find in the world, but is there as much openness and kind of like where you can go and what you can do from at any given point?
There is, and so Miyazaki said it's going to be the size of Limgrave. That's what he said in the interview before the DLC came out. Now, physically, it is the size of Limgrave. I guess you could say a little bit bigger, maybe. But the thing with the DLC is that it's layered. It's stacked. You can go down. You can go up. It's not just left and right. And so even though the map might be the size of Limgrave, there is so much more, or there's way more places to go. You have, hidden caves. You have the coast, where you have 3 different dungeons just in the coast area that you don't really find directly by exploring, but you can find them hidden in different areas. And so there is a lot more to see, a lot more to actually physically go to in the DLC than I expected.
Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning. The seduction and the betrayal. An affair from which gold arose. And so too was Shadow born. What followed was a war unseen. One that could never be put to song. A purge without grace or honor. tyranny of Messmer's flame. And so kindly Mikula would abandon everything. His golden flesh, his blinding strength, even his fate. But we are not deterred. We choose to follow. Will you walk with us?
Yeah, and then that's what I've heard is that it is quite a bit more stacked, and that there's a lot more like underground, up in the air, and so while the overall map size is smaller, like the world itself it's a little bit more three-dimensional, and I'm happy to hear that. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of what they did with like Tears of the Kingdom versus Breath of the Wild, same map, but they've added extra dimensions to it. So I feel like that's actually kind of brilliant game design on FromSoft's part. Like let's not make something that's too huge. After all, this is supplementary to the main game. I think very much so, especially since it requires the main game to do. So if there are some differences in the way that you explore that world, it's because of the fact that you're expected to have already done that in the base game.
Right, and especially like with how long it's been since the base game came out, a lot of the people that are buying this DLC, they've completed the base game. They're not just, far enough.
Right.
A lot of these people have completed it, and so exactly like you said, it gives them something to look forward to and something to do besides just, trying to get their bearings, because they've already done that in the base game. This is something where it's like supplementary, like you said, and where we're not just going in there and still teaching them how to play. We want these players to already know how to play the game and then come in here and just get their ass kicked and then eventually beat the game. And so that's what Shadow of the Erdtree did a good job doing. It's the formula that they followed with it, and it turned out to work very well.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be something kind of special for a while, because, eventually we'll get an Elden Ring 2, but it'll be a new experience that probably teaches the player how to play again as a standalone game. So what's cool about this is that, it's kind of like a little bit more of something really good, for the people that have already done it. And I made an argument the other day on Twitter, like somebody, I mentioned that games like God of War Ragnarok and Spider-Man 2, for recent examples, are sequels that don't do a whole lot to, change what the previous game did, but because the previous game was so revolutionary, what comes after doesn't necessarily need to. And that's something that can be applied, to something like a DLC like this, and especially a DLC that is planned as supplementary material. And we kind of don't bat an eyelid with something like this because we understand that you're supposed to have played through the base game. And it's like sometimes when you have something really good, the best thing to do with that is to just take that world and kind of just expand on it a little bit. Give people just a little bit more of it. You don't have to do anything super new. You mentioned it earlier. This doesn't radically change the way that Elden Ring operates. I think that Elden Ring 2 might have that responsibility.
Right. And so in the DLC, you get 8 new weapon types, right? And so before the DLC came out, when they announced that information, there's people all over Facebook, Twitter, the forums, talking about how it feels like that's going to include, way more weapons. And when it comes down to it, there was really only 2 or 3 weapons per new weapon type. And I think that's a good thing because, like you said, it's just a little bit more of something already good. They're not trying to go revolutionize the game and make it a whole new game. So they include these new weapon types and then just a few items in that category just to give you a taste of what they offered. And so you have like the backhand blades. I believe there's only 2 of those. You have the light great swords, the great katanas, only 2 or 3 of those. It's not something that's going to overwhelm any kind of player who still wants to keep using their base game weapons or builds and then just add on to it.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of perfect in that sense. Like if you have a base game build that really works for you, you can continue to use that. And what I've heard, is that the DLC gives you opportunity to experiment, but it's kind of up to you, how you want to approach that. I think it's in a sense, only having a couple of different weapons per new weapon type actually kind of makes sense because we're talking about the mindset of a late game player, somebody who's capable of beating Moog, and so, what you're going to find as you play the game is that there may only be a handful of weapons that you actually use out of the ones that you collect. I know that's the case for me. So, someone who's more new to the game or exploring the game for the first time might want to try out all these different weapons and see what works for them. But somebody who already fundamentally understands the game, isn't necessarily going to do that. So rather than give you a bunch of weapons, some are good, some are bad, some are going to, let's just give you a couple ones, so that way, because you as a player already know what's going to work,
Yeah, and that's exactly what they did. And the weapons that they did give us are all, for the most part, pretty good. There's a couple of weapons that are kind of, they don't really feel like they are going to be used by the meta players. But there's a lot of the DLC weapons that just fit perfectly into someone's already pre-planned build from the base game and just supplement it perfectly. And so they just slot in there. You could kind of mix them in with the base game weapons, and they just work because they're not super overpowered to where you're not going to want to use your original weapons anymore, but they're not underpowered to where they're useless. You still want to use them, and you could swap back and forth, and they've done a good job with balancing those weapons. Now, at least for PvE. Now I don't know how far you want to talk about PvP. That's a whole mess on its own as far as balancing. I'm sure there's going to be a patch soon for that. But for PvE, for people enjoying the game itself, they've done a good job with the balancing.
Well, actually, I am kind of curious about that because I haven't even dabbled in PvP in the base game really. So, you were kind of alluding to something earlier, like what's going on with the PvP?
Yeah, so with the PvP, it's almost exclusively DLC weapons now. You go in there, and there's no people using regular base game equipment, weapons, anything, spells. It's just everything is overpowered in the DLC. You're getting destroyed by backhand blades with Swift Slash, the twin bolt axes. The new spells are overpowered, especially for an int build like us. You have the twin moons. I've been destroying people in PvP with that because they don't know what to look for, and they don't understand that there's an aftershock, and I get people with that all the time. But the PvP is very broken right now with the DLC weapons, so you can definitely expect a patch on that for balancing, and it'll be coming in the next couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, I imagine so. On that note, it is cool that you get to use one of Melania's attacks. I mean, I feel like that's something that kind of encompasses, what Shadow of the Erdtree is in a sense, is like taking the experience of players fighting this super difficult boss, notoriously difficult boss, you might say, and now let's give the player some of those abilities. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing with Rolana's blades. Rolana is a boss that you're going to fight in Castle Ensis when you go through the DLC. And I picked up her weapons, and I had to go respec to an int build. I was running at the time a Dex Faith build, and I was running Lightning incants basically for the most part. And once I picked up that weapon, I saw how cool it was when she used it against me. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go and I respect my character, and that's pretty much all I'm using right now. And it's just a blast being able to use these abilities. And there's that you see memes going around about like when you finally get to unlock the boss as a playable character and they suck.
Yeah.
That doesn't really apply here because it's still just as overpowered as when the boss uses it.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I have seen like there's like the dual blade like magic and the flaming sword.
Right.
That looks cool as fuck. Like I feel like that's something I would definitely want to integrate.
That's what I'm main handing right now, and it's a blast.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, because like I kind of found what worked for me in the base game already. I mean, this is what I tackled Moog with. I have the Azure's Glintstone Staff and the Moonveil Blade. And then occasionally I'll use the Uchi Katana and another stave. But mainly that's kind of what I'm doing is right hand Moonveil Blade, left hand Azure Glintstone Staff. And so I've kind of almost eliminated everything else. Like I have the bow if I ever want to use it. I found I wasn't using the shield at all, so I removed it from my inventory. But I'm really excited to see, what Shadow of the Erdtree kind of encourages me to do. Because I've got a very specific build that I'm doing. It's just like I started with the samurai build, but I wanted to turn it into a mage type. So I really put a lot of runes into, glintstone sorceries. But, now I'm kind of I got the Moonblade because I heard it was a good weapon for an int build. And so, yeah, I'm finding that there's a whole build of a character around that weapon. And that's just in the base game. The DLC just gives you so many more opportunities to explore new things with everything that it has to offer.
Yeah, and for a build like yours, when you're main-handing the Moonveil, you're going to really love the Rolana's Twin Blades when you do get to that point, get those unlocked. And, for an int build, there's a lot of other things in the game that are pretty good. So you got new talismans as well that are going to help you with that build. You got new armor that enhances different types of magic. You got really a lot of new everything that's going to give you a way to customize your build without feeling like your entire old build was trash, You're able to just supplement it, keep going, and still have a good mix of base game and DLC, finding that balance.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, that's really fucking cool. Like I really think it's cool that what they've managed to do is basically add a whole new like MIDI game, like a miniature part of the experience that was Elden Ring, and supplement the main game in such a way that like we won't see with Elden Ring 2. It'll be something completely new. So props to FromSoft. I mean, DLC in a lot of cases, I think by today's standards, a lot of people look at it in a way that they look at like things like microtransactions. And I've always kind of been a proponent of DLC in a sense that, it's just extra content and you can choose whether or not to buy it. But it's when you have a game like this or like Witcher 3 that has such phenomenal DLC that, feels like an experience comparable or even rivaling the main game that, really like that's how you do it. That's how you do a good thing. And I'm glad that Elden Ring is another game that, no microtransactions, no pay to win. It's just get good.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do have to definitely get good in this DLC. Now, you mentioned, with like The Witcher 3 and their DLC and how good it is. I do have to point out there are a couple of things on this DLC that I wish would have been done better to rival something as amazing as that Witcher 3 DLC. And a lot of it has to do with the story of the DLC. Now, the DLC has its own story separate from the base game, right? And it is a really good a way of explaining one of the characters that was introduced in the base game but never referred to, really, and that was Miquella. Yeah, Miquella. And so you have this character that was referenced in the base game. You don't really find out too much about them. We kind of inferred that that's what the DLC was going to be about even before it was announced. And then they give us this whole separate story. I just wish that this DLC would have tied a lot of the lore back into the base game. There are some, hints at the base game characters or some of the story of the base game, but it doesn't really, and especially in the ending of the game, tie back or connect anything to the Elden Ring story at all. And so you're left with this DLC that visually looks fantastic, gameplay wise is amazing. They have a lot of amazing balance, and then you have a story that just kind of falls flat in the aspect that you don't really get anything new. I mean, we get Mikola's story, but we kind of already separated that because he wasn't in the base game. And so you don't really get anything new of all the plot holes and all of the open-endedness of some of the base game characters. There's a lot of references that we thought we were going to get answers to in the DLC, and we didn't. Like the Glowmide Queen, who is that? Whatever happened to Godfrey? You know, there's a lot of questions here that just didn't get answered in what we've been told is going to be the only DLC that we get for this game.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I mean, I haven't really gotten to check out the story much. I know it's focused around Mikola, but yeah, I mean, I wonder with the nature of the game and like the multiple endings and whatnot, if it was somewhat difficult to do something that doesn't tie into the main game a little bit more. But then again, like you're saying, we could have gotten into the lore of certain characters and things, and maybe they're saving that for a future entry, I don't know, or some kind of other content. I mean, I know there were talks of doing like a series on Elden Ring. That would be pretty cool. I know there's already a manga, so I feel like they should just do an anime.
And I think they've had an official announcement of the anime, if I'm not mistaken. I could
Did
be,
they?
But I thought I saw something along the lines of them having an anime in the works. And so, yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be cool because there's so much lore you could explore, in other media. I mean, even if you're gonna do an adaptation of the game, you could explore more, or they could just do something else set in the world of Elden Ring, which would be really cool. Like have more supplementary content and kind of get into the lore and answer things that we're still wondering about.
Yeah, because there's so much things to talk about, like what exactly is the lands between, what are the other lands that are, surrounding it, how did we end up there as the Tarnished, There's so many different things that they could have gone into a DLC about. Of course, Mikola was probably the prime candidate for being the story that they wanted to tell, and it was a good story, absolutely. But there's a lot more to discover, and so I do hope that this is not the end of what we see as far as the lore that we're going to get about this series.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, like I said, I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to get a sequel, though, it might take like 10 years or something. I would love to see, like I said, more media in the franchise, more media representation for the franchise, I should say.
There is a book coming out, and I'm looking at probably getting it from Toon and Fairweather. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They do a lot of lore books about different video games. They have experts, come in, content creators come in and basically write the lore out in a book format. And so they have one coming out for Elden Ring called Grace Given, and that's going to be something I'm going to be looking into getting because it very deep dives into the lore and tells it as a story, something that the game doesn't really do. The game wants you to piece it together by finding the items, finding the descriptions, and then you putting it together yourself as the player. But with the book format, you get to just see it in a storytelling mode, and that's going to be something that's going to be nice for people who don't quite understand the lore just by playing the game, which, believe it or not, is a lot of people who just don't understand it because they don't read everything.
I mean, you've got the mind of George R.R. Martin at work, who's already very popular with the public. So, and this isn't a casual game. Like, you can't just be a casual gamer and pick up Elden Ring. Like, this is something that's accessible to a very particular audience right now. So widening that demographic so more people can experience the lore, I think, is a very good idea. And I hope we continue to see that.
And I think we will. I think we will continue to see it. They have way too much invested in this series right now to stop it where it's at.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm excited to see. I hope that George R.R. Martin still continues to work with Miyazaki on these. Although I don't know, maybe that shouldn't take more time away from him writing that fucking book.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? There's just so much lore too that George R.R. Martin did write for the game that wasn't even used, and so we have this pool of information that they can still go off of to expand, the series in a lot of different ways via anime, manga, book format. There's a lot of lore left that wasn't used that still has potential.
Fuck yeah. I'm excited to see it. I mean, and I'm sure we are going to see more. I mean, Elden Ring has just become a cultural phenomenon. Like you said, well deserving of Game of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised if Shadow of the Erdtree manages to find its way mentioned in the Game Awards.
And there's been people trying to get it in the Game of the Year conversation for 2024, but as we all know, that's not going to happen for a DLC. But you got the diehard fans that are, they can make something happen. We'll see, but I doubt it.
Well, I mean, maybe 5-10 years ago, what we're seeing as a DLC for Elden Ring could be seen as its own game,
It very well could be, because I like I said, I'm on my second playthrough, and I'm on the final boss right now on that second playthrough. And to do a full clear, that playthrough was 52 hours for me. And so 52 hours of content, that is more than a lot of games that come out, full games. You got like Kingdom Hearts games, for example, is a game that I play a lot. Those stories take about 30 hours to tell if you play the game straight through, and that's for a full game. And then you got a DLC streaming along, 52 hours of content. And so it very well could be in a conversation for Game of the Year on its own someday.
I'll tell you what, I've spent about 80 hours in games so far between the base game and the DLC. And I'm not sure if that includes whatever I played the first time, which was just, like a few hours or so. But yeah, I mean, there's just, and then that was me just kind of basically like what's the word I'm looking for, gold pathing where I needed to go, but still, spending some time exploring and just finding shit. There is one other thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap things up here. What are your thoughts on the final boss fight?
I thought you were going to ask that. Now, the final boss fight, when I was watching that cutscene for the first time, I was like, there is no way this dude is back. Because a lot of us were wondering why Radahn had to be killed in the base game to access the DLC. They never explained it. Now, Moog was pretty clearly obvious, right? You have the cocoon in his boss arena, so obviously you would need to kill him to access it. But why was Radahn needing to be? And so that was a question a lot of people had throughout the game until you get to that final boss, and it just lays it out right in front of you. There's just like, my jaw dropped. There was just no way that this dude was the final boss. And it was kind of a meme at this point, because a lot of people said there's no way that we would ever get to fight Prime Radahn, because the Radahn that we fight in the base game, he's already inflicted with rot, he's already confused. He's not Prime. So if we ever got to fight Prime Radahn, that would be cool. And then here we go. Miyazaki's like, all right, I got you. And he throws that in there. And so, and then I also thought it was nice that they didn't directly have us fight Miquella, because it's been well known, even throughout the base game, that Miquella is not a fighter. And so I would have felt it would have been out of place if we just get to the end and just fight Miquella after hearing nonstop about how he cares about compassion. He's not a fighter. And so they found a way to include him in the boss fight, show that his character is not as good as they intended him to be, or as we believed him to be, while still not having us directly fight him. And so it was, in my opinion, a pretty good boss fight, a good way to end the game. What I would have wished for more, had they had a scene after the boss fight that really wrapped things up better. You do get a scene after the boss fight, and it doesn't really answer anything. Kind of just, if anything, gives you more questions. I would have liked to see Miquella's story wrapped up in some epic final cutscene.
Yeah, okay. So, like, you felt like the conclusion was a little underwhelming.
It was. The conclusion was a bit weak.
And after such a difficult boss fight, because I've heard some shit. I've heard that, veterans of this game that have beat the game 7 times over, even fucking Let Me Solo Her had difficulty with this boss fight. Spent, just hours and hours and hours on this one boss fight. I mean, is it harder than Millennia?
It's 100 times harder than her. I mean, it makes her look like a cakewalk, Yeah. So you walk in, you can't even summon your mimic or, your summons, whatever it is, because you walk in and you're just getting nuked
No.
the second you walk into that fog door. And so he does a gravity attack where he just locks on, and no matter where you're at, you're getting nuked. So it's pretty easy to dodge, but then he's just right on your ass. He's attacking, he's swinging, he's throwing rocks at you. There's really no windows to kind of get attacks in unless you're running some kind of like cheesy build. And then you get to phase 2 where he just nukes you again anyway. And then now he has Mikola fighting you also. And so his attacks just get buffed with all kinds of holy damage, and you know, it's a wild fight, way harder than Millennia. Way harder. And it took me, probably on my first playthrough, it took me several hours, probably a full day worth of time in getting that boss down. And then on my second playthrough, I still haven't beat him. Because on my second playthrough, I'm on NG8 now, and so the difficulty is max scaling, and I still can't beat him on my second playthrough.
That's pretty intense. I've heard some shit. So I was curious to hear your personal experience with that, and like again, you know, we'll have people in the community like let me solo them, you know, who could finally learn these fights and fight them without being touched, right? But like, man, I'm just glad that, you know, FromSoft has managed to just really double down on the difficulty.
Yeah, me too. Because like I said, I thought I was going to be too overpowered for it. I was nervous that I wasn't going to be having any fun with it, and they found a way to fix that. So yeah, it was great. And you know, for now, I'm just going to live vicariously through everyone who can go solo that guy without taking a hit, because there's no way I will ever be that good.
I mean, I had difficulty enough, and like Radon and Moog were probably the most difficult bosses in the playthrough, and they give you plenty of time to prepare, you know, like you have a lot of time. And by the time I did defeat Radon, I actually beat him very easily because I had spent quite a bit of time actually like leveling up my character in every aspect, upgrading my armaments and you know, getting the right equipment. By the time I faced Radon again, it was easy. And Moog posed some difficulty for me, but in the end, I mean, I had a strategy that I was kind of able to make the fight a lot easier. Without, you know, spending bukus of hours on it. I mean, I just kind of did, you know, I stayed up all night and killed him. So those were difficult enough. I mean, and I even had difficulty, you know, with Godric at first, you know, and so like to hear that just those boss fights, you know, and the amount of difficulty I had with them, you know, I haven't even faced Millennia, so it's almost unfathomable to me how difficult the Radon boss fight at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree is.
and it is, and you'll get there, and you'll see. But you just like you said, just get good, spend those hours, and anyone will be able to beat that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is a strategy, you know, there is, and you know, the execution, the mechanics, the controls, the handling. I mean, everything has been perfected, and they continue to patch it to this day. So, you know, you've got so you can't blame any of it on the game being bad. I mean, it's all you. It's
Not
all
at
skill,
all.
right?
and that's why even with the insane difficulty, I wouldn't rate the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC worse for that difficulty. Like, I know a lot of people are review bombing it right now on Steam and stuff like that because of that difficulty, but you know, I just can't do that. I can't in you know, good faith rate it down for the difficulty when they give you ways to get better at it.
Yeah, exactly. But all right, bro, I guess we'll go ahead and get into our final thoughts here. So what do you think about Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree?
I think it is a fantastic DLC that found a perfect balance on finding a new feel to it while still keeping the original game intact and not giving us something that's too overwhelming that almost feels like Elden Ring 2. So I think they had that perfect balance in there. It's a solid probably 9.5 out of 10 for me.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, as little as I have explored of it, has truly humbled me because, I mean, I've gone through some shit. I've definitely put in some hours into this game. Not as many as a lot of people have, but, you know, I dedicated some time to just really just frustrating myself over and over and over again. And you know, being thrown into the DLC, I mean, I've gone to the Belurat dungeon, which seemed to be the closest dungeon to me, and I've kind of explored a little bit. I went to the castle, and I walked around trying to find a few things around the map. But I know that, like, you know, some areas that I go, like, enemies are just one-shotting me again. And I got to the point that I beat Moog, and then that was a pretty big accomplishment for me. I think that was the most difficult encounter of the game for me up to that point. No, I take that back. There's a fucking rune bear in a cave that fucking I just gave up on.
Yeah, at least there's no rune bears in the DLC. At least not that I've encountered. So you got a good path ahead of you, man. It's going to be fun, and I hope you enjoy the DLC as much as I have. And for anyone listening, stick with it, and I hope you enjoy it as well.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, with as little as I've played, you know, I welcome to Dark Souls, bitch. I mean, that's the experience that I'm continually experiencing with this game, and it looks like that's been extended. So anyways, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or feedback on your platform of choice. Check us out on Good Pods and help us climb up the ranks. Also, check out Collateral Let's Play on YouTube. Right now, we have that on the Collateral Cinema YouTube channel, but we'll start uploading that on the gaming channel as well here during the inter-season. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles Part 2. So we are covering the second game. And then we'll be wrapping up the season. Our next episode will be on 007 Nightfire. And then our season finale will be on Doom. So we are currently planning Season 7 of Collateral Gaming. And I'm really excited about what's coming up. We're still in the planning stages, but it's going to be good shit. And we appreciate all of the support that we've had. Michael, thank you so much for being on this episode, man. It was a blast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely couldn't have done this without you.
And all my sacrifices of dying 1,000 times.
Exactly. So hit us up on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We do also have a Patreon, and at some point soon I'll upload some actual new content on there. On Collateral Cinema, we just did a episode on Home Movies Season 1 with Cam Sully from the Jacked Up Review Show. He's been a guest on this podcast as well, so that was fun. Very soon here, we should also be getting out our Mikeversary episode on Happiness of the Katakuris. And I do think we're going to do an At the Movies episode on Deadpool and Wolverine, which I'm excited for. You can find Collateral Gaming and Collateral Cinema wherever you get your podcasts. I think that's really about it. I think we're good.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah, man. All right. Well, this has been Collateral Gaming, and we are out.
Collateral Gaming is a Collateral Media podcast. All music and game clips are owned by their respective creators and are used for educational purposes only. Please don't sue us. We're poor.